that Khartoum is the failed state already. Okay? Already. It has the earmarks that ought to be the way we designate somebody a failed state. Okay? The National Congress Party, which has been in power since June the 30th of 1989, took power by coup. It overturned a democratically elected government, which was not a great government, I have to tell you. They did a lot of bad stuff in the short time they were there. But it was democratically elected, and the NCP did its coup, then called the National Islamic Front. In that period of time since then, they have fundamentally stolen the entire economy. They control it, of northern Sudan. On agreements that they reach, whether it's the CPA or whether it's the DPA or any of the other agreements that they've ever signed with the Eastern Sudan or anybody, they have what I call a perfect track record. 100% of the time they do not keep those agreements. And what it does is it buys them time. It is a strategy of stalling, okay, stalling their way through situations. When the CPA was finally signed, from the very beginning, they chose not to implement most of its very important aspects. I mean, for example, one of them was the definition, defining the boundaries of this place called Abyei on the border between North and South. Probably the most volatile single point within Sudan. From day one, when that portion of the CPA was to be implemented, Bashir refused to deal with it. And for 3 years, he chose not to deal with it. And nothing ever happened. The United States, who wrote that protocol, never called them on it, never made an issue of it. None of our envoys, none of our diplomats made an issue about not pursuing the definition of the Abyei boundary. So what happened? Okay, finally in 2008, but basically there's more to the story than this, but they burned the place down. Some of us were actually up there when it happened. It was literally burned out entirely. And I won't go further on that. They only implement when they are compelled to do it. Okay? There has to be a stick that goes along with the carrot. For these kind of failures to implement, they have never really been seriously harassed by any one of our special envoys, or seriously even by the international community. The international community just let the CPA on autopilot. Khartoum is also one of the very few states that's listed in the failed states index with the highest possible negative marks on criminalization of governance, okay, and on lack of legitimacy. If you look at the Small Arms Survey, they fault Khartoum as the primary distributor of the kinds of weapons that are doing the killing all over Sudan, and particularly in the south at this point. They have been consistently at war with all of their marginalized populations, north, south, east, and west. Their own base is a very small kind of base. They achieved, in the case of the South, the total destruction, for all practical purposes, of what little infrastructure and development was there. And then, not to mention, they also oversaw, precipitated the surplus deaths of people in the South and allied areas that totaled about 2.5 million people. Essentially, they signed the CPA and they chose not to implement most of the key parts. And that is the strategy. So whenever you get a signature from Khartoum, you got to look and see if it's written with disappearing ink. because that's what actually tends to happen when the implementation stage comes. Okay, now let's talk about the government of Southern Sudan. Big problems. Okay, this is confession. I can be honest. Okay, there are big problems. All right. But let's talk about their situation a little bit. Okay, the government of Southern Sudan is 62 months old. Any of you seen a 5-year-old kid? I don't mean to make light of the government of Southern Sudan. It's 62 months old. It came to power in the most destroyed area of the world at that time. The most destroyed people and the most destroyed landscape. Okay, it has serious problems that nobody will deny. Okay, they are corruption. It is a serious problem in South Sudan. Okay, there is general weak governance, and there is terrible communal violence. Okay, these are realities. Okay, my feeling about those realities is that they are addressable. They are addressable kinds of issues given a combination of time and the kind of engagement with the government of South Sudan that assists them in actually addressing them, because they do wish, not every single person perhaps, but do wish to deal with those problems and to eliminate those problems. And beyond those, in terms of governance, they are democratic in orientation. Okay? They compromise regularly because of the requirements of getting along via the CPA with the government that's in Khartoum. But their aspirations are for democratic governance and for development of the population. Those are two things you will never see in the National Congress Party's lifetime. All right? Point I'm trying to make is that it is with the aspirations of the South that our interests lie. If their major problems can be addressed, corruption, weak governance, and so forth, you mentioned the 150 international people positioned there to work within the system there, and the 5,000 in East Timor, and you look at the number that were placed in Mozambique, and you look at the number that were placed in all these other places, you say, why have these guys only got 150? Because we're not addressing it. We haven't been addressing it. Okay, and my argument is that if we, especially at this difficult time, when I'm suggesting that our actions have destabilized the South at this critical and dangerous time, it is important that we demonstrate a commitment to them for the longer term. And it has to be more visible. It has to be long term. And we need to understand that going in, because they are seeking to overcome this package of problems with which they are confronted. Now, to me, you've got positive aspirations for population, for quality of governance or type of governance, and so forth, on the one hand. On the other hand, you have a dead soul. The National Congress Party's soul is dead, okay? And that is why, to me at least, in terms of what ought to be our priorities, Khartoum is the failed state. We'll see about the South when it actually gets to implement its independence, which I think will be relatively soon at this point. But I believe we should not be writing them off as a failed state in advance. With that, I'll stop.